we are experiencing another sort of post-Reconstruction, some historians and scholars would argue. And much of that is a direct result of the browning of America. When we were in college, I was in grad school and you were in undergrad.
Right.
We were reading about 30 years from now, which would be now, 40 years from now, which would be down the road, where the America would be more brown, more people of color. And that's starting to happen.
Yeah.
We know demographically today that there are more young people under the age of 5 that are elementary age than ever before in America's society. So what you see is a psychological response to white folks being afraid that they are going to disappear. And if you couple that with the white birth rate, both here in America and around the world, there is a sense that white people may in fact disappear. And although that's unrealistic that they will disappear, there is that feeling, there is that sensibility, and it's sort of a psychosocial response to talking about. And then there's also the whole notion that you brought up earlier about white fragility, if in fact that does exist. And, you know, Robin DiAngelo did a great service to many white liberals and progressives by creating the term. But what we're really talking about, this backlash is about power. Racism, which I learned from Dr. Turner, James Turner, our founder and director of Africana Studies, said that racism was both power, prejudice, and privilege, those 3 Ps. And when we think about it from that particular formation, we begin to understand that this white fragility is really about white people maintaining power and control over the lives, not just of black people, but all people of color. They want to control the narrative and make us a footnote in their historical documentation of how they see us.
You preaching, man. You are preaching.
Uncontrolled Substance.
Welcome to Uncontrolled Substance with your host, Dr. Cozzette Lyons-Jones, Chief of Adult Medicine for the Watts Healthcare Corporation.
Uncontrolled Substance.
Welcome to Uncontrolled Substance with Dr. Cozzette and Mr. Noel Jones.
What up, what up?
All right, this is episode 19. Education and Black History, an important determinant of health, is our topic today in honor of the National Black History Month.
That's right.
Yeah. I know we talk about Black History Month, and it just used to get under my craw. You know, month. We get a month, right?
For our history.
For our whole history, right? So for me, it makes me feel some kind of way, but not anymore, because I know that there's more information available through the internet and the books that have been published since we were younger. You know, so people that want to know can know, right? If you don't want to know, then you can stay in the dark and be ignorant. Right. So this is an opportunity for us to look at Black History Month and the situation in education that's going on right now. And Black history, you know, there's a theme, which I didn't know, that goes with Black History, National Black History Month each year.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, so that was pretty interesting. So this year's theme is Black Health and Wellness. And, you know, the themes are chosen by the ASAALH. And I'm trying to remember what that acronym stands for.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I'm just like, what did that stand? Oh, the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History.
That's it.
Ah, got it. It's a mouthful. But that it's important because that it is that organization, the founder of African American Studies and the founder of this organization, the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, is Mr. Carter G. Woodson, right? And he created the concept of Black History Month, or the first iteration of which was Black History Week. We only had a week initially, right? In February of 1926. And so now, you know, fast forward to today, Black History Month's theme, as chosen by the ASAALH, is Black Health and Wellness, which is right up my alley.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I appreciate that theme. What's wonderful about that is the fact that we're in the middle of a great, you know, explosion of information that's going out there in terms of COVID, because we
Okay.
always talk about COVID in the context of something negative. But in this instance, COVID took off the covers on a lot of things that we knew about, that people in public health, people in healthcare, people in law, in their specific sectors knew in terms of disproportionate impacts of negative things.
That's right.
On marginalized communities, particularly Black people.
Yeah. Education as well.
Right, right. So when I think about education, we know it translates to better health the more educated you are.
That's right.
And when you go to rural areas, go down south, you go into urban areas and communities, you know that the education is not equal, between certain populations and others.
That's right.
Right. So that's why we chose this topic today, and we have a dear friend, Mr. Brian Sales, that will come on the show later in our examination room and in the checkout. I don't know why I got a brain fart just then. But yeah, so it'd be great to have Brian on today to be able to have a conversation about education, Black history, and just the situation, the landscape in America right now in those areas. So we're going to hit some of the news, though, right quick, and kind of get a jump on the waiting room. You remember, you're sitting there, you're waiting for your doctor to come in. She or he is backed up because the first 3 patients came late, or he or she is backed up because they just took their sweet bippy getting into the room because they were talking to friends. I don't know. It's different reasons. But we want to, delve into some of the news. So one of the stories that was out there on NBCnews.com, I saw, came across it about a week ago, that teachers are struggling as the debate continues over teaching race during Black History Month. And this is right in alignment with our topic for today. So an Indiana school counselor emailed a memo to teachers allowing them to opt their children out of Black History Month lessons. School officers described his actions as demonstrating poor judgment. Once again, politics have converged on the classroom, right? You read some articles about 32 states in the last year introducing measures that limit how race and gender can be taught in public schools.
That's right.
With about 14 states imposing laws or rules to enforce those restrictions. Bills allowing cameras in the classroom and state-controlled lessons, with teachers considering leaving the profession over state restrictions, is what we have to deal with now. So folks are leaving because of burnout from COVID and all the different, mask mandates, vaccines, all the things, being at risk just from that. Now you have all this going on.
The politics has just gotten out of control, and its reach is unbelievable right now, to reach down into the classroom like that, based on conservative ideals and ideologies about what should be taught as it pertains to the facts of history and Black history. It's ridiculous.
So think about this one. In states like, say, New Hampshire, Republicans are pushing to ban teachers from advocating any doctrine or theory promoting a negative account or representation of the founding and history of the U.S.
The whitewashing history of the United States of America?
Yep. The state of Virginia launched a tip line to report teachers of divisive subjects. A tip line. I'm going to tell on you if I think that you're teaching something that, is, offensive to me.
Or if you have an abortion in Texas.
Or,
a lot of tip lines, a lot of snitching.
Lines,
what's going on with these Republicans?
Snitching.
And their fear of, and their desire to have snitches on this stuff. It doesn't make any sense.
No, it does not. HuffPost reported on the Florida GOP push of a bill to shield white people from discomfort of our racist past.
And that's the key.
Yeah.
Shielding white people from discomfort, when they should embrace the history and look to better the country. This is one of the best countries in the world.
Yeah.
I used to say this is the best country in the world.
Yeah.
I don't know. It may still be. It may not be. But it can be better.
Yeah.
And the way for it to be better is to embrace the history and then push us forward.
Yeah.
And that's everybody's job.
So this bill prohibits public schools and private businesses from making white people feel discomfort when they teach students or train employees about discrimination in our nation's past. Wow. School board meetings have gotten out of control. They're duking it out. It's a battleground. Parents are going at it, right? They're debating on polarizing subject matters such as COVID, mask, and vaccine mandates, critical race theory, which we'll talk about some more later in the show with our guests, and what can and cannot be taught in the classroom. Books about blacks and the LGBTQ communities are being pulled from libraries, right? Red states are especially giving pushback on allowing critical race theory in the classroom. Governor Ron DeSantis said, in Florida, we are taking a stand against the state-sanctioned racism that is critical race theory. We won't allow Florida tax dollars to be spent teaching kids to hate our country or to hate each other. Think about these buzzwords. Divisive concepts, that's a buzzword, so that you can attack, and it's usually used by opponents of critical race theory. So just kind of wanted to put that story out there. And let's pivot for a second.
Okay.
Because we're going to hit this topic even more so in the third and fourth segments of the show. Let's talk about COVID for a minute. Because we can't have a show without talking about COVID, right? Inmates who died asked for release before falling ill with COVID. That was a story that I came across, I think, in the Kaiser Health Network news. And what bothered me about this is that the pandemic, once again, is showing us how we just don't have a heart for all humans, regardless of where they are. It's like once you go into the prison system, we don't care about their health. And then that connects back to the families that are impacted by the people who work there. So then they take it home to the families, and then that's in the community, right? So we're all connected, even if you don't have a relative in prison. Somehow there's a connection that's there, right? So that, I thought that was pretty interesting. There was some deaths that happened as a result of people not being released who were higher risk. They had high risk medical conditions, and they knew that these were vulnerable or more vulnerable than the others, and yet they weren't allowed to go home, and they ended up dying. So the deaths of 3 women imprisoned in West Virginia, for example, reflect a federal prison system plagued by chronic problems exacerbated by the pandemic, like understaffing or inadequate medical care or few compassionate releases. These are subjects that have always been an issue, even before the pandemic, but now it's amplified as a result of COVID. So that hit me in my heart, to hear about this.
Regardless of where you stand on abortion, we should all be pro-life, meaning those who are here with us, we should be for them. Homeless individuals,
right?
Those in prison,
right?
Those who brought it on themselves, those that circumstances beyond their control brought dire things on them. That's what it means to be human and to have humanity, is to look out for one another. And these people were very, very vulnerable. They knew it, and nobody stepped up for them.
So with COVID, it's going to be with us, right?
Yeah.
And you've been saying this from the beginning, and I've been saying it's going to become endemic since the beginning as well.
Yeah.
But now the scholars are saying it.
Yeah.
The experts.
They've caught up with the mathematicians.
Yeah, there was an article in The Atlantic that said that it won't end up like the flu. It will be like smoking. It was the title of the article. And it says it's suddenly become acceptable to say that COVID is or will soon be like the flu, such as analogies have long been the preserve of pandemic minimizers, but lately they've been creeping into more enlightened circles. Are you happy that people are finally changing the messaging and accepting our fate of where we are?
I think so.
Yeah, so I think we're going to take a break, go pay some bills. We'll be back on the Real Urban Radio Network on Uncontrolled Substance. Stay tuned.
The Real Urban Radio Network is streaming live on the World Wide Web at www.realurbanradio.com. Log on for the best old school and today's R&B. Can't get to a computer? No problem. Download our app from your smartphone app store. Just search for the Real Urban Radio Network. Here we go. Downloading. Bam. Just like that. You can take us everywhere you go. Also follow us on Twitter and Instagram by searching for us at Real Urban Radio 1 and Facebook by searching for the Real Urban Radio Network. We keep it real 24/7 on the Real Urban Radio Network. We're supporting black businesses and black lives always matter.
Uncontrolled substance.
Welcome back to Uncontrolled Substance on the Real Urban Radio Network with Dr. Cozzette and my love, Mr. Noel Jones. It's a lot in the news.
Yeah, at the time of this recording, Russia has invaded Ukraine, and hundreds have already died in the attack. We don't know how far it's going to go. I want to say a prayer for those that are involved. Men and women are dying and are going to die because of a war that was someone's choice. And it makes no sense. And to have a war in Europe, of all places, war anywhere is bad, Syria, Afghanistan.
Yeah.
But it's Europe where wars between certain parties turn into world wars.
Yeah.
And so we say a prayer for our leadership.
Yes.
That they're smart, intelligent, that they don't extend too far. But we say a prayer for the world because human nature, it seems, hasn't changed in 10,000 years. And you would never think we'd go back here. Who wants a war in Europe? It doesn't make any sense.
Absolutely. Now I want to just go cry. Thank you, Noel.
I'm sorry. It's the gorilla in the room. I've been distracted all week. Even while researching this topic, Black history, education, Black wellness, I've been distracted.
Yeah.
And it's been tough.
I believe it. Let's pivot back to what we were talking about in the check-in. Now that we're in the waiting room, continuing in the waiting room. The endemicity.
Oh,
am I saying it right?
Yeah.
Endemicity.
Endemicity is meaningless.
Yes.
An article from the Atlantic at the beginning of this month, and it read, by now we've all heard some version of how this ends, meaning COVID-19. What lies after the COVID-19 pandemic is labeled endemicity, a post-pandemic future in which some say our relationship with the virus becomes simple, trifling, and routine. Each infection no more concerning than a flu or common cold. And we've all talked about that.
Right.
Endemicity, so the narrative goes, is how normal life resumes. In reality, endemicity promises exactly none of this. There are countless ways for a disease to go endemic. Endemicity says nothing about the total number of infected people in a population at a given time. It says nothing about how bad those infections might get, how much death or disability a microbe might cause. For example, herpes simplex 1 affects at least half of Americans, though most of the infections are asymptomatic or not terribly severe, especially among adults. On the other hand, malaria sickens more than 200 million people a year and kills at least 400,000, most of them under the age of 5. And both viruses are considered endemic. So, getting away from the text, you hear about this thing becoming endemic from public health, especially from our politicians. But what really does that mean? What is it going to look like down the road? And that's not to scare people, but it's to say, hey, we need to just be mindful that this thing is not coming to an end. So now when people are mad that, all right, you have to wear a mask. Okay, now you don't have to wear a mask. And then go back to wearing a mask. People understand this thing is changing. And no one knows exactly where it's going. So continue to educate yourself and continue to be careful.
Now, that brings to mind that there's more research coming out in terms of the long-term effects of COVID and long COVID syndrome. And the information that's coming out now is we're seeing that there are certain risks that we can identify in a patient or that will determine their risk of developing long COVID syndrome. Some of the, I think the top 4 that has come out so far that I read about was the severity of presentation, which speaks to the high viral load that a person would have at the time of presentation. If they have chronic conditions,
That's
significant autoimmune or inflammatory conditions that would predispose them. Diabetes was listed on there. And what's interesting, if you think about it, the people who are disproportionately impacted by these chronic conditions are people of color, particularly African Americans. And so when you talk about who will present, most likely, we can predict that it would be African Americans that present disproportionately with long COVID syndrome. That's disability. That's lost days of work.
That's right.
That's income loss for the family. That's families losing their homes and being homeless. That translates into what we're already, grappling with disproportionately. But now we're looking at it through the lens of COVID. So you're absolutely right. This isn't over. There is no return to normal. It is, moving from a pandemic to an endemic. And it's just one of those situations where we have to face it. Just like with Black history and all histories from people of color, we have to be looking at it with the eyes wide open.
Wide open.
And be honest about the reality
That's
of the
right.
situation.
That's right.
Yeah. Wow. But virus deaths have been dropping.
That's good. That's good news.
Right. As Omicron fades. So we don't want to just be doom and gloom.
That's good news.
Right. The first Omicron death was reported in December. Remember? And was the dominant variant by Christmas. Newly reported cases are starting to decline in the U.S., driven by drops in the Northeast and the Midwest. A good sign the surge is fading as far as Omicron. The 7-day average for new cases was about 129,000 last week, down from a mid-January high of over 800,000.
Good.
The 7-day average for reported deaths in the U.S. was over 2,000, according to data out of Johns Hopkins. Mortality data can be choppy due to reporting delays across the state, so we have to keep that in mind. Omicron was less virulent but more contagious, causing record numbers of cases and deaths. The CDC hasn't released data comparing death rates among vaccinated and unvaccinated COVID cases, right? But I did hear I think on NPR, I love how they've been covering the pandemic. They were talking about the percentage of people who were vaccinated and unvaccinated in the hospital setting to determine risk. And the numbers showed that up to 90% of the people who were hospitalized were either under-vaccinated or unvaccinated.
That's right.
So I think it was about over 50% unvaccinated, about 40% that were vaccinated, but they didn't get the full series or they didn't get boosted.
Gotcha.
And that left 10% of the people who were hospitalized who had all, 3 vaccines. They were boosted. And that speaks well of being fully vaccinated.
Absolutely.
And the protection, and that is doing its job in terms of reducing severity of disease.
That's right.
Hospital admissions and death. So, that's something to put out there to those people who may still be hedging with regards to getting vaccinated or even getting boosted, because there are some people who got the initial series that they're questioning the need for a booster.
That's right. I hear that only about 1/4 to 1/3 of people who got the initial 2 doses have gone on to get boosted. Only a fourth. I mean, you went out and got 2 shots. Come on, get that third. Yeah. Come on, get with it.
That's right. But People have their reasons.
Yeah.
You know, so we don't want to vaccine shame anybody.
You beat me up about 2 months ago on that, so I'm good. I'm not going to shame anyone.
Thank you. In California, where we are, death counts have recently been on the rise, though.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, you know, again, it lags, you know, behind.
Yeah, death lag.
And data lags, death lags. So overall, though, the numbers in terms of new cases have been going down across the nation. So that's good news. I want to talk, I know we had a previous show in 2021 on police brutality and just, you know, what needs to happen in terms of reform in that area. And we can't ignore, there's so many elephants in the room. The room is full of elephants. But the Kimberly Potter sentencing that happened recently in terms of the killing of Dante Wright.
That's right.
Because, you know, a lot of people were hurt by that, particularly that family was hurt by that verdict, when you have a judge that was tearful, almost in tears, but the tears were in sympathy for the killer and not for the deceased and their family, his family. So that shows that we still got work to do. But Dante Wright was a 20-year-old father who was killed in April of 2021 by Officer Kim Potter during a routine traffic stop for an expired license plate and air fresheners hanging in the rearview mirror. Can you explain to our listeners why I mentioned that?
You know, that we had to look that up.
Yeah.
Because I guess certain air fresheners could block your view if they're hanging from the rearview mirror. And if they're blocking the windshield and a officer sees it, they can pull you over for that. And I had no idea. How about disability placards? How about parking permit?
But you know,
placards?
If you're not driving, you should. I mean, if you're driving, you don't need to have those hanging from your window. It's for parking.
I need to stop having them hang from my window because I don't need to be pulled over. I've been pulled over enough about a number of things. I don't need to be pulled over about my parking restriction placard.
Yeah, you got pulled over driving while black. That's the main
number of
situation.
times.
Right. But, you know, that's something to put out there just to tell people, you know, be safe when you're driving. Just the simple things could get you pulled over. And it's legal and you may not even know it.
And get you killed.
Right. And, you know, of course, also in this scenario, he had some outstanding warrants, I believe. So that, you know, collectively didn't bode well. Dante tried to pull away from Potter when I guess that was discovered. And she reached for her taser, mistakenly getting her gun instead, and shooting him to death. Her sentence was 24 months in prison, broken down 16 years in prison with credit of 58 days for time served, and 8 months of supervised release, a fine of a little over $1,000, can't possess firearms and ammo or explosives.
Okay.
Yeah. The family of Mr. Wright said that they felt cheated and hurt by the verdict, with his mother stating the sentence caused her to feel like her son died all over again. And I can feel her pain.
Jesus.
I, as a mother of a chocolate, beautiful son, I can't.
Yeah.
You know, I can't. So we wanted to say the work continues. We probably will revisit this topic again.
Yeah.
Because Joe Paul was phenomenal last year.
You got to bring Joe Paul back.
Got to bring him back. To revisit this topic, but it's a lot going on. You got COVID, you got a war, you know, WW3 might be under, you know, coming in our, God forbid, you know, it's just a lot. So, you know, we're being prayerful, and as we go into the next segment, we're going to, you know, do this in honor of Black History Month and talk about, you know, education and the importance of including our history, Black history, in the full story in the school settings in particular, so that we can heal as a nation and really see, you know, this is what our founders did,
Yes.
We didn't do it. I'm not blaming you as an individual. You weren't alive.
That's right.
But we as a people have to acknowledge the societal, systemic, and structural racism that exists that perpetuates continued disparities among our people in different populations. So we're about to take a station break and ask you just to hang in there with us as we take this station break on Uncontrolled Substance on the Real Urban Radio Network, and we'll be back with our guests momentarily.
Uncontrolled Substance.
I'm Dr. Baker, an ER physician. If you're having leg pain, swelling, or redness, but haven't talked to your doctor yet, don't wait. This could be deep vein thrombosis, a blood clot which could travel to your lungs and lead to a pulmonary embolism, which could cause chest pain or discomfort or difficulty breathing and be deadly. Your symptoms could mean something serious, so don't wait. Talk to a doctor right away, by phone, online, or in person.
Brought to you by Bristol Myers Squibb and Pfizer.
Tired of online shopping, takeout food, and vacations by car? Then join the COVID-19 plasma trials, sponsored by Johns Hopkins University. You could receive plasma that contains antibodies from recovered COVID-19 patients. So if you or a loved one has just tested positive, participating in the trial could help you fight it. Join today at covidplasmatrial.org so we can all get back to boutique stores, jet setting, and not having to eat out of a cardboard box. covidplasmatrial.org. The fight starts here.
Uncontrolled Substance.
Welcome back to episode 19 of Uncontrolled Substance, and we are so excited about our guest this month. He's a dear friend from way back when, our undergrad years, right?
Cuse is in the house. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Oh, shut up. Anyway, and I'm talking about Cornell, the Big Red.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. You didn't go to Syracuse, did
No,
you?
I didn't. Fam's from there, though.
Yeah, families from Syracuse. So we have two connections to our guests. So we'd like to welcome Mr. Brian Sells, a national consultant in the youth development, youth mentoring field, providing training and technical assistance for nonprofits. He is originally from Syracuse, New York, and now lives in Northern Virginia with his family. He has a bachelor's degree in history with honors at Hobart College and a master's degree in Africana Studies from Cornell University, the Big Red. He is currently pursuing a doctorate in social work at Morgan State University. Welcome, Brian Sells, to Uncontrolled Substance.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We appreciate your coming on. So, this month's theme is in alignment with the national observance of Black history. And we definitely know, and I know you know as someone pursuing your doctorate in social work, that education is the cornerstone of literacy across the board, in finances and health, in every dimension, every domain. And this month's theme, actually, for Black History Month is in alignment with that of health and wellness. So it's about the theme, I guess, specifically is Black health and wellness, and it focuses on the importance of Black health and wellness by acknowledging the legacy of Black scholars and also other ways of knowing, looking at midwives and doulas and things, because we can track that all the way back to the plantation. So it's exciting to have you on today as someone who has two very important lenses to speak to the topic of education and Black history specifically, and the importance of that specific social determinant of health through your lens as an Africana studies major, as well as your social worker lens. And I will call you Dr. Sells now. So we'll jump right into the interview questions. Something very basic. Why is education a social determinant of health? I know I just said a quick blurb about it, but from your perspective, why would you think that they chose education as one of the social determinants of health?
That's a great question. I would think that with increasing levels of education that individuals can earn through study, formal study as well as informal study, one can gain a better and greater awareness of, what types of best practices for one's health are important. Now, there's both the organic information that we might get from our community mothers and fathers or grandmothers, and that are shared, deep into our southern roots, but also back into ancient Africa, when we learn from our ancient traditions, as well as what we have brought through sort of the Holocaust of enslavement. But most importantly, as we gain more education, we're able to learn what those best practices are for our healing, for our health, for proper nutrition, for the appropriate amount of exercise. Again, we all live in these urban environments. Many of us today are struggling with our own health. Even myself here have had some health issues. So it's not necessarily a direct relationship, but the thinking is that the better educated you are, both formally and informally, about what you're putting in your body and how you're taking care of your body, obviously one is able to hopefully take better care of themselves. And I think statistically, and Dr. Cozzette, you can speak to this better than I can, I believe African Americans are living a bit longer, statistically speaking.
We are, but we still lag behind other populations, specifically white populations. So we still got work to do. But right. Yeah, but you are right. We are doing better than previously because we do have more modalities in medicine to be able to help people to live longer, like especially cardiovascular disease, which is the number one killer. But beyond that, we still are disproportionately represented across the board in most of the top causes of morbidity and mortality. One of the things that I wanted to really have a conversation with you about is this whole backlash that I'm reading about and seeing in the news and just experiencing as far as now that everybody's trying to be woke, right? And more woke. And, we're dealing with issues of white fragility in the face of dealing with our past and actually incorporating that, or how to incorporate that into the curriculum in the school systems, both in elementary and grade school and higher education and beyond. But there seems to be a lot of, backlash, and it's making it difficult to really get to that place where you get the full story of our history as Americans. How are we to talk about Black history or any history of marginalized communities if we can't talk about the parts that make white people uncomfortable?
Well, we can't. I mean, the reality is,
straight up,
that's just real. I mean, if we want to keep it 100, as the young people say today, it's important for us to not get caught up in the feelings of white folks. And we don't necessarily mean that in a disparaging way, but you can't talk about Black history without making white people in general feel uncomfortable. That them dealing with race and racism is an issue that they themselves have to confront. Whiteness has controlled them, has enveloped them, it has socialized them, and has made them feel superior throughout their time in existence in America. When we think about what history is and how history is taught, just think about the backlash to critical race theory. Critical race theory is not being taught in high schools and elementary schools or junior high or middle school.
That's right.
That is a legal construct. So that's a false flag. That's a narrative taken up by white conservatives as a backlash and a part of the Trumpism that took place over the last 4 years, which was a response to Obama's election and his presidency for 8 years. We were in a period of retrenchment. We're in a period where we are experiencing another sort of post-Reconstruction, some historians and scholars would argue. And much of that is a direct result of the browning of America. When we were in college, I was in grad school and you were in undergrad. We were reading about 30 years from now, which would be now, 40 years from now, which would be down the road, where America would be more brown, more people of color. And that's starting to happen. We know demographically today that there are more young people under the age of 5 that are elementary age than ever before in America's society. So what you see is a psychological response to white folks being afraid that they are going to disappear. And if you couple that with the white birth rate, both here in America and around the world, there is a sense that white people may, in fact, disappear. Mm-hmm. And although that's unrealistic that they will disappear, there is that feeling, there is that sensibility, and it's sort of a psychosocial response to talking about. And then there's also the whole notion that you brought up earlier about white fragility, if in fact that does exist. And, you know, Robin DiAngelo did a great service to many white liberals and progressives by creating the term. But what we're really talking about, this backlash is about power. Racism, which I learned from Dr. Turner, James Turner, our founder and director of Africana Studies, said that racism was both power, prejudice, and privilege, those three Ps. And when we think about it from that particular formation, we begin to understand that this white fragility is really about white people maintaining power and control over the lives, not just of black people, but all people of color. They want to control the narrative and make us a footnote in their historical documentation of how they see us.
You preaching, man. You are preaching. Woo. Can we take a step back for our listeners? Because that term critical race theory is so polarizing, right? And a lot of people hear it and they don't really know what it is.
That's right.
Can you define it briefly for our listeners?
Well, I want to be real clear. I'm not a legal scholar. I do have a little bit of knowledge about it, but critical race theory in some ways, and I'm going to sort of take a look at it. Critical race theory is essentially a legal construct, a legal idea that borrows both from the Black Studies and Ethnic Studies movement and the critical legal studies scholars that argue that racism is permanent, that it's normative, that it's rooted in American society, and that it's a fundamental way, by using the law, it's an instrument that lays a foundation that sort of codifies racism in all walks of life. And that these disparate treatment of black people speaks to why in which the law has been used to control both the movement of black people, but also how in which we are able to engage in the world with whites. Just look at the racial inequality in terms of mass incarceration. Just look at what happened with redlining. There's so many different walks of life in which we can talk about how the law has been a part of our experience and how these differential treatment speaks to our particular existence here in American society. So, again, white conservatives took this particular construct, misunderstood it, did it intentionally, and it became a boogeyman. They don't even know what it means. If you ask them, for the most part, critical race theory is not being taught in schools. There may be certain concepts, but just to talk about race, it does something to white people. White people are the only people who are so afraid to hear the truth about American history. That's deeply pathological and deeply psychological. I don't want to sound like I'm talking about all white people, but in general, when we talk about white culture, we're talking about white people who are fundamentally afraid to deal with the truth.
Well, that's a good note to end on. We need to pay the bills, so we're going to take a station break and then come back in and continue the conversation. I want to go deeper into the codification of racism as far as the legal things that are going on in the area of education and the backlash against Black history being incorporated into the schools. There's been some crazy stuff out there in the news, and we can talk about that in a moment. But want to just take a station break. Okay, you good?
Sounds good.
Alrighty, sweetie. We're going to take a break. This is Uncontrolled Substance on the Real Urban Radio Network. Stay tuned.
The Real Urban Radio Network is looking for the next big media star, aka radio DJ, radio host. If you're interested in hosting your very own radio show, send an email of interest to info@realurbanradio.com. We're a Black-owned company that's an extension of the community. The platform was created for you to say what's really on your mind with no pushback. If you're the person we're looking for, contact us via email and let's have a discussion. The email again is info@realurbanradio.com. We look forward to hearing from you. In the meantime, check us out at realurbanradio.com or download the app from your app store by searching for Real Urban Radio Network.
Welcome back to Uncontrolled Substance on the Real Urban Radio Network with our guest, Mr. Brian Sales. Brian, let's jump right back into it.
Yeah, Brian, just following up on the codification of racism, there's been almost 30, and maybe more by this time, bills introduced around the country, which seem to be a result of the political backlash against critical race theory. Would any of them, if enacted, affect how you would develop programs or curricula in those areas? Are there any ones that you're looking at specifically that's like, wow, how would I advance my program with this law in effect?
I appreciate your question. If I understand what you're saying correctly, I think what's important for us is resistance and struggle. As Black people, in order for us to be where we are today, we automatically, because of our own experience in this country, our lived experience in this particular country, and the oppression that we face, we're going to resist. We're not going to accept the this new paradigm, which is really an old paradigm, packing itself back up and repackaged as some sort of form of reverse racism. White people have to, as a community, they have to begin to become more comfortable with the historical truth. It shouldn't be a requirement for Black people and brown people and other people of color to be quiet about our history. We are here. We're not going anywhere. We're 35 to 40%, depending on what census numbers you want to read. Mm-hmm. And as I said earlier, we are the larger number of children that are in schools today. So the reality is you can't continue to suppress it. You can't just sort of put a blanket over everything and just think everything is just going to disappear because you pass laws. Down in Florida the other day, I think they just passed a law saying that you can't use the word gay. You can't talk about race. In my home state, Virginia, the governor has a line in which people can call to talk about and complain about even teachers and others using terms like race or Black history or anything like that. Again, this is a continuation of what Trump did while he was in office. So we have to put a stop to it. We have to continue. Our program shouldn't change. We have to fight.
So I have a general question, and we're going to do some rapid fire, questions. Given this is the final segment, we want to get as much out of you as we can, Mr. Sales. How much knowledge do you think kids need of their past to go forward successfully in life?
That's an interesting question. I think if we think about it in terms of knowledge, we're talking about knowledge of self. There's a concept that I've learned about recently called racial socialization. And it's the idea that Black and brown and other people of color talk about both a reaffirmation of one's culture and history, but also prepare Black people, in particular Black children, for the realities of being Black in America. So that starts at a young age. Young people develop a racial consciousness as young as 4 or 5, according to some researchers. But the historical part, in terms of the knowledge part, that's about a young person's developing both their self-concept of who they are and what they can become. So again, it's a fundamental part of who we are. It's a fundamental part of our culture. It's a fundamental part of our history. And ultimately, there are studies and research, and I'm not an expert on this. I don't want to sort of speak out of turn, but understanding who you are and what you can be is a fundamental part of any human being's projection of themselves in the future. And that starts at a young age. It's incumbent upon parents to both provide that education in the home, whether you do that in your religious institutions and schooling institutions or in your peer group and family. So it's important. Now, I don't know if you can put a percentage on it, though.
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah. Now, did you hear about that counselor in Indiana who sent out the memo to parents giving them permission to opt out of their child from attending the Black history lessons?
No, I didn't hear about that. Tell me more. It's
crazy. Because we only got a few minutes. That's the gist of it. There wasn't really much of a backlash against that person. They just kind of gave him a slap on the wrist and said it was poor judgment. And that's a problem for me. because that lets the person off easily, and they don't understand the significance and the impact of their actions, what it really reveals about them, about that system, and how they don't value our history enough that they would allow people to opt out.
You know, around the world, and Brian, jump in if you have any thoughts on this, but around the world, we've seen countries struggle with their past racial history, South Africa, Germany, and it seems that being upfront and open is the best way forward. South Africa, by way of example, I believe that was called Truth and Reconciliation.
Truth and Reconciliation, yes,
exactly. Can we see that here? Is our system set up to be able to go there? And then I want to throw in a question about reparations, but maybe that's just on me. I always talk about that. But can you see that happening here, us forcing that to happen here?
That's a great question. I wish I had a crystal ball. During the Clinton administration, the late historian Dr. John Hope Franklin tried to convene, or at least on some levels convene, these racial dialogues. And I remember still when I lived in Syracuse, in our community, them having these sort of racial dialogues, and it came through the faith community. You know, interestingly enough, which is probably something else that our faith community should be involved with. It's a challenge because, again, there is this white backlash. There is this sense that white people are losing control of their culture, and their culture and their identity is linked to how they define themselves as American and how we, as people of color, are not American. And it's this contradiction. So you have this cultural class, you have these socioeconomic classes, and you still have the elites still controlling things. At the end of the day, your question is great. I don't see it in my lifetime, but at the same time, if you would have asked me when Cozzette and I were both at Cornell if we would have had a black president, I would have said, you're crazy.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great question. I think it's an ongoing struggle, and I think we're moving to that at this particular point. And in terms of reparations, I think all of these conversations get back to the wealth gap. It gets back to the history of this country. It gets back to the inequality and the disparate impact that the history has had on all of us, black people, Latinos, the native indigenous people. And clearly these communities are speaking up and speaking out, and white folks are responding. The Confederate monuments going down. All of that stuff, this is a normal process, but our country is at a crossroads. And, you know, at some point, these questions will have to be resolved.
Indeed, indeed. This is the checkout now that we're in, and we don't want to end on a somber note. We want our listeners to walk away feeling empowered, not only by the information that was conveyed, even if it makes them go and be introspective about their own beliefs and where they sit, but also to give them resources, maybe some suggestions of places that they can go to, books they can read. Would you have any suggestions in the area of Black history and just this whole conversation that we've had, just any part of it that you think would benefit our listeners to maybe go check out?
Absolutely. I mean, there are tons of books. I think we had mentioned earlier through email, Dr. Joy DeGrew's book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. It talks about America's legacy of enduring legacy in terms of what has happened to enslaved Africans. There's a book by an Afro-Latino scholar called Racism Without Racists by Eduardo Bonilla Silva. I was influenced heavily by Dr. Maulana Karenga right there in L.A. Introduction to Black Studies is a great book. If you want to really learn more about critical race theory, there's tons of books by both Dr. Derek Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw, who I think is at UCLA, Richard Delgado. You have several Black bookstores, I believe, there in Los Angeles. Issa One I've been to several times, and I believe that there's another as well. But quite simply, the information, there's so many more books about Black people in all walks of life today. And the information is there. Information is power, as they say.
Indeed, indeed. For our white brethren and sisterin who are listening.
Sisterin?
Yes, sisterin. For our friends of the cause, What would you say to them in terms of what you've observed, or just in general, just some words of wisdom or celebration of where we are now compared to where we've come from, because we have come a long way. We have a long way to go still, but there has been progress.
Yeah. Well, I think that the continued education is important for them. There are a bunch of books. One of my scholarly friends, well, she's actually in the process of writing about white fragility in the nonprofit sector. But there are tons of authors that they can read. I mean, the book White Fragility is a good starting point by Dr. Robin DiAngelo. She has another book that precedes that whose name, it's called What Does It Mean to Be White, which I think is a better book, but it's a little denser. There's a book here I have in my hand called Raising White Kids, Bringing Up Children in a Racially Unjust America by Jennifer Harvey. There's a classic text called Uprooting Racism by Paul Kibble. And sometimes, whether this is not necessarily always the case, sometimes white people hear about and understand race and racism better from other white people. The sense of guilt that some of them may feel, the emotions that they may feel, sometimes they can hear a little bit better if they hear it from somebody who comes from their background. And another white woman who does some workshops that I haven't met, but I know about her work. Her name is Dr. Allie Michael. So I think it's all about education. I think it's about, making sure that you're in spaces and places where you can both educate yourself and your family and children and not be afraid to talk about race and racism.
Right, right. The importance of this topic is that through education, it opens doors for you. It allows you to have higher income.
Yep.
To be able to live in a better neighborhood that has green space and not a food desert, and, places that have better schools. All of those things, translates into better health ultimately. And so that's always the lens that I look at all this through, on both the medical and the public health side. So we so appreciate your perspective and your coming on. Noel, do you have any comments? Because I see you've just been nodding your head and smiling through this entire conversation.
I'll say this. I didn't take an Africana course at Cornell, and that's probably my biggest regret during my undergrad years. And you guys
still have time, though.
You guys are spitting out knowledge, and you're right. I do still have time. This country is based on self-determination, or that's the way it was founded. From the capitalism side, in terms of knowing what you want, going after it, from the legal side, from just the democracy. You have to be able to pick yourself up and move. Now, we've been in a position for 300 years where we've had a foot on our necks, so we can't do that. At the same rate, even close to, say, a poor white person to be able to change their circumstances. But education is the starting point for that. Education is the starting point for that. And then reaching back and helping our brothers and sisters to get to that point. And we're going to need more than that. We're going to need the government to step up. We're going to need reparations, I believe. You never start. You can't run from behind and catch up without that boost. So we're going to get there. But man, I really appreciate the knowledge you dropped today, because it's opening my eyes, and I'm going to be looking at reading some of these books that you've listed.
All righty. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you both.
You are just a jewel, and I'm sure we'll have you back again.
Yes.
I appreciate it. Thank you both. I appreciate it.
Wonderful.
And don't say you're in L.A. and don't look us up anymore. That's for sure. Got you.
Well, it's been a few years, so
okay.
I certainly will. I certainly need some sunshine. So
yes,
I definitely need to be out there. So appreciate you both. God bless you, and continue to do the great work that you're doing. Thank you all so much for having me.
Thank you. And that's it for this month's segment of Uncontrolled Substance on the Real Urban Radio Network. We are on the air every fourth Sunday of the month, at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time with Dr. Cozzette Lyons and her ride or die, Mr. Noel Jones.
All right.
All right, that's my husband, by the way. Yes, yes, for those of you who don't know. Thank you, and we look forward to you tuning in. You're tuning in and listening again on the Real Urban Network next month. God bless.